I'll try to put it into sort of relatively simple to understand terms, because it's quite a technical issue. But this type of material, this RAAC, the aerated concrete, if you liken it to an Aero chocolate bar, it's got very much the same properties as regular concrete, but it's not as dense and it's not as durable. The issue with these concrete panels is they're fabricated off-site and then brought to site. So it's a very quick and very cheap way of constructing, certainly roofs in the first instance. Now, it became very popular post-war, so certainly late 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s as well. As I said, as a very quick and efficient way of constructing public buildings. So that obviously that'll be schools and colleges in the first instance, but could be as widespread as court buildings. It could include hospitals as well. We don't, as it stands yet, we don't yet know the full impact. But obviously, if we're focusing on the building stock, the issue with this particular product is it was thought to perform as well as your traditional concrete material. Used in a roof, you would normally construct the roof structure, and then you would overlay that with a waterproof membrane to provide the water tightness. Obviously, over time, you would get issues where that waterproof membrane may deteriorate or it may become damaged and water will get in. So then this particular form of concrete is quite porous. So where you would normally have a concrete structure that would literally retain the water on the surface, this allows water to penetrate through the concrete material itself. And then the other thing with this is you've got a reinforced steel within the concrete as well to give it its strength. Once water gets inside the concrete, that then starts to corrode the steel that's inside, which then causes structural damage and structural failure of each of these individual panels. So that's when a visual inspection takes place. You would see obvious signs of deterioration or damage, where you would see obvious cracking within the surface of the concrete panel as you look up at the roof, as an example. The problem with this particular material is it isn't always evident that structural damage is there. Under normal circumstances with concrete, you would see an obvious crack. With this type of concrete, it isn't necessarily always visually obvious that there's structural deterioration. So that's why they're in a position now where we've had issues where schools have been inspected. I can only assume that the obvious visual evidence wasn't there, but then we've had significant failure where these panels have collapsed inside the school.
And this moisture, is this heavy rain is making these roofs worse, Malcolm?
It could be, yeah, it could be. So as I said, predominantly they're used in roof structures. So you're going to obviously get rainfall on top of the roof, and you would normally have a weatherproof membrane that prevents that rain and moisture from entering into the structure. But over time, because these buildings are 30, 40, 50 years old, you're obviously going to get damage. One of the other issues that I think they're finding is you do get a lot of interventions happening. So schools may come in and decide that they want a skylight putting into the roof, or they may be putting air handling units to deal with the ventilation system on top of the roof and adding additional weight to the structure as well, which again can cause issues. You then tend to see failure where they've constructed holes through it predominantly.
And how easy is it, Malcolm? You said this concrete comes in panels. How easy is it to fix an area that might be crumbling? Do you just take off a panel and put some bricks in place, or do you have to take down whole walls, whole roofs? How massive is the maintenance job?
The initial intervention, I think, predominantly is to depends on the size of the room, obviously the height of the ceiling, but the initial intervention is to construct some internal support underneath the roof, which would predominantly be a timber structure. So you'd put some additional beams in and then put effectively you'd underlay timber underneath the roof panels to prevent them from falling. Obviously, depends how serious it is. For the more severe cases, you'd obviously then look to replace panels, but obviously that would mean removing the roof in its entirety. So you've really got, I think what's going to happen is you're going to have to take each individual school or each individual room on a case-by-case basis to see how severe the issue is. And then obviously the remediation that's needed will then follow, dependent upon, as I said, how extreme the damage is or how extreme the structural failure is.
Would they have known when these bricks were put in that it had a very limited lifespan?
They knew that at the time when it was, I think it was a Swedish product originally that when it came over to the UK, and I think the BRE has done some investigations in terms of its lifespan, and I think they determined it had normally a 30-year lifespan. But what I would say is that pretty much every construction material that you use, even nowadays, has got a lifespan associated with it. So you do have to build in a contingency and a contingency fund for replacement of certain elements of building structure. So if you take cladding as an example, cladding has got a lifespan. If you take other issues in terms of flooring, and we've got all these PFI contracts that are going ahead with schools and hospitals and everything at the moment, where you've got certain maintenance regimes in place for certain elements that have to be replaced over time. That's just how construction works. It just seems that I think a lot of funding obviously is levelled at maintenance, but that funding is finite, so it can only go can only stretch a certain way.
Very briefly,
from my perspective,
Malcolm, very briefly, is it a fair criticism to say that the government or local education authorities were asleep at the wheel here?
I wouldn't say so, because there has been, I do know that the local authorities have been undertaking a series of inspections on these schools to assess the risk. So obviously what they've been doing is categorising from let's say a scale of 1 to 5. And for those that are severe, they're the schools that obviously have been shut in recent weeks on the basis of the issues that have happened with the failure that we've seen.